June 4th, 1942. 14,000 feet over the Pacific Ocean, the world looked calm, almost peaceful. The sunlight reflected off the water like scattered coins, and thin layers of cloud drifted beneath the aircraft. But for Ensign Thomas Weber, that calm was a lie. He was 19 years old enough to fly a warplane, but barely old enough to get a beer back home. His gloved hands shook on the control stick of his Douglas SBD Dauntless, a plane he had known for only 11 weeks, exactly 47 flight hours in type. That was it. And now here he was, part of one of the most important American airstrikes of the entire war. Below, whenever the clouds broke, he could see 4 massive Japanese aircraft carriers carving white scars across the ocean's surface. In training, those ships were distant ideas, targets drawn on chalkboards. But right now, they were real, moving, alive, and dangerously prepared for battle. The radio hissed with static. Then the voice of Lieutenant Commander Dick Best, steady, controlled, unmistakably serious. All sections, prepare to attack. Follow your division leaders. Execute on my mark. Weber swallowed hard. The briefing had seemed straightforward. Stay in formation. Follow your leader. Release your bomb at 2,500 feet. Everything neat on paper. Everything simple in theory. But war doesn't care about theory. One moment, his section leader was flying smoothly ahead. The next, the engine on the lieutenant's plane coughed, then burst into black smoke. Over the intercom came a strained voice. "Section 2, I'm hit, pulling off." The damaged aircraft peeled away, dropping toward the ocean in a trail of smoke. Just like that, Thomas Weber, 19 years and 3 months old, found himself in charge of a 3-plane section, responsible for 2 other pilots who were barely older than him. It was his first day in combat, and suddenly the choices he made in the next few seconds might determine whether those men survived the morning. Anti-aircraft fire began to bloom around the Japanese carriers, dark puffs spreading like ink across the sky. The enemy ships were turning sharply into the wind, preparing to launch fighters. Weber had only moments to choose which carrier to attack, how to angle his dive, and when to commit. The next few minutes would help decide the fate of a war, and would permanently change how the United States Navy trained its pilots. For 6 months, since Pearl Harbor, the Japanese Navy had been the unstoppable power of the Pacific. Their 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were the pride of their fleet, capable of launching coordinated waves of aircraft far larger than anything the Americans could manage at the time. American intelligence knew they were coming. Admiral Chester Nimitz had positioned the carriers Enterprise, Hornet, and the battered Yorktown northeast of Midway, hoping to ambush the Japanese strike force. But even with that advantage, one huge problem remained. Most of the American pilots were inexperienced, dangerously so. Many had joined the fleet only a few months earlier. Some had never dropped a real bomb in combat. Some had never even landed on a carrier before they were thrown into the fight. Training was rushed. Mistakes were common, and the Japanese knew it. Captures of early war American documents had led Japanese commanders to believe U.S. naval aviators lacked discipline and formation skills. Their assessment wasn't entirely wrong. At the Battle of the Coral Sea a month earlier, American dive bombers had hit almost nothing. The kill ratio had been terrible. For every Japanese plane lost, America lost 2. Now, at Midway, these same young pilots were being asked to take on the most powerful carrier force on Earth. And yet, despite everything, they were about to turn the tide of the war. The Douglas SBD Dauntless, the aircraft Weber, and so many other young pilots flew that day, wasn't the fastest or the most glamorous plane in the war. It wasn't sleek like the Zero, and it wasn't as intimidating as a torpedo bomber. But it was tough, honest, reliable, the kind of airplane that rewarded discipline and punished mistakes. Its 1,000 horsepower Wright Cyclone engine could push it to around 255 miles per hour in level flight. With a 1,000-pound bomb slung under the fuselage and dive brakes that rattled like sheet metal in a storm, the Dauntless demanded a steady hand, especially in a combat dive. A proper attack meant rolling inverted at around 14,000 feet and pulling the nose down into a near vertical plunge, sometimes 70 degrees or more. It was the kind of maneuver that made your stomach feel like it was climbing out your throat. Anti-aircraft bursts shook the plane, and the slipstream screamed against the frame. Then, at around 2,500 feet, at least according to the textbook, the pilot was supposed to release the bomb, then haul back on the stick and pull out under 4 or 5 Gs before blacking out. Old veterans said the Dauntless would take care of you as long as you flew her right. But young pilots didn't always get the chance to learn what right meant. The Navy had already lost more Dauntlesses to training accidents early in 1942 than the Japanese had shot down in combat during the same period. Many trainees misjudged their pullout and plowed straight into the sea. Others froze under pressure on their first live dive. Everyone in the Pacific knew it, especially the Japanese. Their pilots were some of the most seasoned in the world, many with years of combat experience in China. Their carriers had swept across the Pacific almost unopposed for half a year, and their intelligence reports had painted a clear picture. American pilots were brave, yes, but uncoordinated, inexperienced, and inefficient. And on the morning of June 4th, it looked like those assessments were true. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, commanding the Japanese carrier striking force, had every reason to feel confident. The morning had gone exactly as planned. His carriers had launched a powerful airstrike against Midway Island, and although the American defenders fought fiercely, their aircraft were hopelessly outmatched. The Buffaloes and Vindicators sent up in desperation were shot down or driven off without scoring a single meaningful hit. Then came the American torpedo squadrons. If courage was the only currency of war, the men of Torpedo 8, Torpedo 6, and Torpedo 3 would have been wealthy beyond measure. They flew slow, underpowered Devastator torpedo bombers straight at the Japanese carriers, skimming the waves, giving the enemy every possible advantage. Their formations were shattered by Zero fighters and shredded by anti-aircraft guns. In 3 separate attacks, 41 American torpedo planes were sent in. 33 never came back. Not one torpedo hit its target. From the Japanese bridge, the pattern seemed obvious. The Americans attacked in scattered groups, one squadron at a time, always low, always predictable. Their pilots were determined, but their tactics bordered on suicide. Nagumo had every reason to believe the next attack would be more of the same. His fighters were low, chasing the last of the torpedo bombers. His lookouts were scanning the surface of the water for more incoming threats. What nobody on the Japanese side realized, not yet, was that the torpedo squadrons had accidentally accomplished something extraordinary. By dying, their sacrifice dragged every defending Japanese Zero down to sea level. Not a single fighter remained above the fleet. The sky above 10,000 feet was empty, and hidden just above the scattered clouds at 14,000 feet, 47 American dive bombers, unseen, undetected, were beginning their attack runs. 3 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were moments away from disaster. The 4th, Hiryu, still untouched, was about to meet Thomas Weber. Thomas Weber could hear his own heartbeat inside his helmet. It thumped louder than the engine, louder than the slipstream, louder than the distant rumble of anti-aircraft guns waiting far below. Ahead of him, Lieutenant Commander Dick Best, leading the Enterprise dive bomber group, rolled his Dauntless sharply and pointed its nose straight down at the Japanese carrier Akagi. A 2nd division banked left toward Kaga. A 3rd angled toward Soryu. In less than 10 seconds, 3 of the most powerful carriers in the world would be under attack. Weber and his 2 wingmen belonged to a different group, Scouting Squadron 6, and in the chaos of battle, they had been separated from many of their squadmates. Their job was to strike targets of opportunity, hit whatever carrier the other divisions couldn't reach, and that target was now coming into view. Hiryu, the 4th carrier, the only one not under attack, the only one poised to launch another wave of aircraft at the American fleet. If Hiryu survived, she could still change the outcome of the day. Weber felt his mouth go dry. The clouds beneath him opened like a curtain. And there she was, Hiryu, sleek, fast, painted in the muted grays of the Imperial Navy. Sailors sprinted across her flight deck, dragging bombs and fuel hoses. Aircraft handlers in bright jerseys tried desperately to clear the deck for launching. Flames from the earlier Midway strike were still being hosed down aft. Even from 14,000 feet, Weber could tell the ship was scrambling. She wasn't ready. Not yet. This was the moment. Weber clicked his transmit key. "Section 2, follow me." It was the first time he had ever said those words in combat. His 2 wingmen acknowledged, nervous voices, tight breaths, but steady. Then Weber pushed the stick forward. The Dauntless rolled gently, then tipped into its dive. The cockpit instantly filled with a howl of wind. Gravity grabbed hold like a giant hand, pulling him downward. His stomach floated, his vision blurred at the edges. The dive angle hit 70 degrees, almost vertical. The altimeter's numbers unwound like a clock running out of time. Tracers from Japanese guns began whipping upward, thin bright lines reaching for him through the air. The entire ship seemed to be firing at once. Orange muzzle flashes flared from the carrier's sides. Puffs of black smoke burst around him like exploding ink blots. The noise was everywhere, distant and close, muffled and sharp all at once. Weber forced himself to breathe, short and quick. "You trained for this. You can do this." At 8,000 feet, the carrier grew larger. At 6,000 feet, he could see crewmen diving for cover. At 4,000 feet, the ship almost filled his windscreen. His hands were sweating inside his gloves. At 2,800 feet, lower than recommended, he steadied the reticle on the center of the flight deck, just forward of the island structure, and pressed the bomb release. The Dauntless lurched upward as the 1,000-pound bomb fell free. Now came the hardest part, pulling out before gravity and speed crushed him. Weber hauled back on the stick with all the strength he had. The aircraft groaned. His vision darkened at the edges. The G-forces pressed him into his seat like a slab of concrete. For a second, he thought he wouldn't make it. Then the Dauntless leveled out, barely 50 feet above the ocean. Water sprayed up behind him in a long white wake. He exhaled a breath he didn't remember holding. Behind him, his rear gunner shouted over the intercom, "Hit! Direct hit! You got her!" Weber jerked his head around in time to see a blossom of fire erupt from Hiryu's deck. Smoke billowed upward in a twisting column. Flames licked across the flight deck, swallowing aircraft and fuel hoses. Japanese sailors ran in every direction, some diving overboard as secondary explosions detonated. His wingman's bombs struck moments later. One near the forward elevator, another exploding against the ship's starboard side. 3 bombs, all on target. In less than a minute, Ensign Thomas Michael Weber, a 19-year-old pilot with barely 11 weeks of training, had helped cripple the last operational Japanese carrier in the battle. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt shocked, empty, and very, very young. But the battle wasn't over yet. Hiryu was burning, but she wasn't dead, and the Japanese Navy wasn't done fighting.